Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hi and welcome to the ISO Show. I'm delighted to be joined by Jessica Matthys, who's the lead product manager over at Pulsora, and she's going to be covering a really interesting topic. It's all about taking data complexity from spreadsheets to supply chains and looking at how that can be simplified and optimized for organizations. So we're going to be talking about all things from data fragmentation across different business units, suppliers and locations, through to balancing the accuracy and practicality to basically ensure that we've got really useful, usable data. And she's also going to be sharing with us some examples of that working in practice as well, including the human element and looking at helping to basically provide solutions for teams that are overwhelmed with relying on manual spreadsheets. So yeah, very, very warm welcome, Jessica. Thank you for joining us today. I know it's early morning, isn't it, from where you're located at the moment?
Yes, thanks for having me, Mel. Yes, I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area, so bright and early on a Monday morning.
Great. Could we just start by, if you could just explain a little bit more about your role and what you do at Pulsora?
Yeah. So Pulsora is an end-to-end sustainability management platform based on an AI-powered platform. And so really what we do is everything from data collection and carbon accounting all the way towards ESG reporting and supporting audit processes as well. And really the focus of our platform is around the auditability and transparency of it all. So unifying all of that data, all of your sustainability data to really enable all kinds of downstream use cases, whether that's analytical insights or decarbonization planning or reporting and compliance. And the piece that I work on is I'm the product manager for our carbon solutions. That's one of our two products. And I've been with the company for about a year and a half, but worked in the ESG and carbon and sustainability technology space for about over 8 years. So it's been a really long time, but really excited to be here and talk to you about what we do today and how we, as you said, support customers, many of whom are on that journey of the first time moving from spreadsheets to like a true sustainability platform.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us today. And I'm really looking forward to diving into unpacking some of that knowledge and expertise in this space today on the podcast. But before we do that, could you tell me something that not many people may know about you?
Yeah, sure. So one fun fact about myself. So I started to get interested in sustainability in high school, actually. So I guess I've been in the space for a while, passionate about this area for a while. And one thing that I did is I actually went and I lived on a farm for a semester in high school. So kind of a unique experience, taking care of the animals, really connecting with the land, a bit of a hippie thing, but was really formative in my early career and professional journey, and really set me on that path where I am today.
Great. Okay. So from farms to basically providing solutions for data complexity for organisations.
Yeah.
I think obviously I think sometimes Excel spreadsheets can really baffle a lot of individuals and organisations when it comes to understanding how that can best be used as a tool for managing GHG data. And obviously we know that can be very complex. And there are so many different ways, more advanced ways of being able to simplify that data through using software. So, I mean, in your words, I mean, what would you say that data complexity really means in the context of sustainability and carbon accounting today?
Yeah. So I think there's three main elements here that we think about with data complexity at Pulsora. So the first one is just the disparate nature of data. So when you think about greenhouse gas accounting, what it really means is you're taking all of the activities that a business may perform, all the things they purchase, all the things they consume, all the upstream and downstream relationships across their value chain, and you're trying to equate each of those activities with greenhouse gas emissions equivalents, which is a really tricky thing to do because that data lives everywhere across a business. It's not stored in one single place. And that's really why there's this need for a sustainability platform to unify that data together. But the complexity part comes in because sometimes you may not know where this data is. Sometimes this data may live in a spreadsheet or an email somewhere, or it may be in an energy management system, a procurement system, an HR system. So there's just a lot of different places where this data needs to be brought together in order to have that kind of comprehensive and high quality picture of emissions. So that's the first thing in terms of where your data lives. The second is sometimes you don't have primary data. Sometimes there's a supplier that, is in a remote region or is using mostly, phone calls to communicate with you as a customer, right? And so sometimes you need to make estimations or you need to gap fill data that may not be available. And so coming up with that methodology and making sure that it's repeatable and high quality is another aspect of this data complexity problem. And the third one is there's a lot of movement towards auditability and traceability in this data. So as I mentioned, this is something that I'm really interested and focused on at Pulsora, is making sure we're putting this data together in a way that is going to be robust enough to stand up to these new audit requirements that a lot of the regulatory compliance reporting directives are including. Like we see this with CSRD, we see this with the California SB 253 and 261. There's this new focus, which previously was voluntary, but now is becoming more and more mandatory for companies to have a true audit practice around this data. So the convergence of all those three is really tough to manage in terms of all of that data complexity.
Yeah, we've covered CSRD quite a bit on the podcast, but we haven't covered the new Californian regs, and we are hearing more about it. We are getting more inquiries about that. Could you just expand on what the requirements of that are? Don't worry, not going into too much detail, but maybe from a carbon reporting and verification perspective.
Yeah, happy to. So there's two main aspects of the climate bills coming in California next year. So there are two bills. One is SB 253, one is SB 261. And these bills are supported by CARB, which is the California Air Resources Board. You may have heard about them from some of the early smog-related regulations that they helped enforce. But anyways, essentially what these two regulations are, one is 253, which is really around emissions accounting. So this is really for companies who are doing business in California, which means they have employees in California or they are selling products in California over a certain revenue threshold, to report on their Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. And this is all, California is not trying to reinvent the wheel. It's just sharing another outlet for where this data may go. So you can still follow your normal GHG protocol. There's no change in methodology, but it's really just getting that data and that transparency and sharing that with California. And this bill, specifically 253, does have some assurance required. So there's a limited assurance requirement, and it comes into effect next year. Currently, the expectation is that it will be due at the end of June 2026. And in the first year, they're only requiring Scope 1 and 2 data. So you can get started if you aren't, quantifying your emissions already, or you are and you have never pursued a formal audit process. This is the year to get started and focus on that Scope 1 and 2. And then in the second year, they'll be adding on the Scope 3 requirement as well. So that's the first one. The second one is 261. So for SB 261, really the purpose of that bill is climate risk reporting. So again, California is not reinventing the wheel, coming up with a new framework or standard. This is really just following existing climate risk aligned frameworks like the ISSB or TCFD. And really the purpose of this one is sharing a link to that report with California. So you publish that report on your company's public website or somewhere else, and then all you have to do is share that link with California. That one is coming up really soon. So the current expectation of the due date is actually January 1st. So we have just under 2 months to get that, to submit that. But there's also some discussions about potentially delaying that a little bit, still within the 2026 timeframe. So that's what companies should be thinking about with regards to these two bills, is really thinking about formalizing their audit process, getting ready for scope 1 and 2, and then pursuing or sharing that climate risk report if they haven't already created one.
It's been really helpful, and I think what we'll do is we'll include a link to those regulations in the show notes, along with the Pulsora link as well, because I know that you're very much involved in this area in terms of supporting organisations to comply with those regulations. So let's say an organisation has got a couple of months, but they're dealing with manual data collection right now. What would you say are the biggest pain points for the sustainability teams when faced with dealing with the manual data collection?
Yeah. So I want to tell a story for this one about a particular customer we saw a couple of years ago who came to us saying, we have, and this may be a bit of an extreme example, but I think it illustrates the challenge that you're describing. So they came to us with this spreadsheet that was actually called the monster spreadsheet. This spreadsheet was maybe, 100 tabs, and it had hundreds of people adding to it, and just so many different, pieces feeding into each other, dependencies on different cells. And ultimately, it was always crashing and not
I'm not
staying.
surprised. It sounds like it's a beast.
And so, I think when companies try to pursue this on their own, which, to be fair, some companies want to do this the first year to make sure they have the level of domain understanding to pursue the sustainability journey, they quickly find that those type of spreadsheets are really just not robust enough to handle the level of data comprehensiveness, data quality, and then also, as we talked about, auditability that's needed to pursue these goals. Because if you can't trust your data, then how are you going to trust the insights coming out of it, the different decarbonization opportunities you may have, or the stakeholder communications that you want to engage with? So those are some of the biggest challenges, I think, in terms of just, nobody wants to be dealing with a monster spreadsheet. Folks in sustainability teams would much rather be pursuing sustainability initiatives, right? And engaging with stakeholders, working on different communication strategies. So that's a big reason why a lot of folks want to move to a platform approach. And, I think some of the ways that a platform helps this, right? One is there's a lot of opportunity for AI. AI can help with bringing data together, as we talked about, from disparate sources. It may be in different structures, formats. You may have different columns representing different things. AI can help bring all that data together and also then look for anomalies on top of it or duplicates on top of it to make sure that full picture is complete. And then the other thing is there's a lot of collaborative workflows that we enable on Pulsora. So instead of, somebody, let's say you're looking for an electricity bill in some facility that's in a different region where you operate. Today, maybe you email this person, you call them, you ping them on Slack. But sometimes that person, maybe it's a facility manager, they may not have the understanding or the context around the urgency of bringing that data and turning it into emissions. Or they may not know about greenhouse gas emissions. But with Pulsora or some of these other more collaborative platforms, you can keep all those communications under one roof. You can really provide that full level of auditability in terms of, sending out that data request, looking at the timestamp of who has answered it. Maybe there's an approval layer. Maybe no one answered it, and so the system is sending an automatic reminder saying, hey, remember we asked you for this electricity bill detail, right? those things and collecting them all under one roof, kind of the orchestration of the human aspect of data collection, is another really big piece that a platform like Pulsora can solve.
Yes, I guess that really helps to unify fragmented data across different business units and suppliers and geographies. And obviously, it's interesting to see what kind of role that AI plays with it. Are there any other tips or kind of guidance on that about unifying any fragmented data across business units?
Yeah, in terms of AI use cases,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I would say, look, AI, everyone's talking about AI, right? And there's a lot of different things we can do with AI now. There's also a lot of really exciting things that we are going to be able to do with AI very soon. So I'll talk about some of the things that we can do now. One of those things that's very exciting now that we have, agentic AI, which means like AI that can kind of coordinate between different paths of exploring data or taking decisions itself without a human in the loop. One of those things is really around supplier data. So let's say you're a company that has 10,000 suppliers, and you know that 1,000 of those suppliers are really high contributors towards your greenhouse gas emissions. But you only have relationships with 100 of those suppliers. So maybe you can reach out to those 100 and you have these, tenure, these relationships that you've both been investing in over time, and they may be willing to share some emissions data with you. Some more specific emissions data like product carbon footprints, for example. But there could be this other category of suppliers which are very material to a company's emissions footprint, but they don't really have that strong relationship and they don't have the trust to be able to do that data sharing directly. So this is something where AI can come in and help. An agent can go in and look for any kind of published materials that supplier has put on the web. They can look for any kind of descriptions around emissions. They can look for other product carbon footprints they may have published. They can even take, emissions data and maybe some financial data and come up with an intensity factor for that supplier that says, for every dollar you spend with a supplier, this is how many emissions are associated with that. And so by using AI to help collect that data, we're able to take the load off of the sustainability team or off of that data analyst and also kind of provide those deep source links to exactly where that data comes from. Because the other aspect of, this use case, right? This is an agentic AI use case where AI is going and crawling the web looking for data, right? The other aspect here is, again, what's so critical about this data is auditability, transparency, audit readiness. So we can't do AI without always having the visibility of what data came from AI and what is the specific source link or place where that data was found. And so we try to couple those two things together with anything that we do AI-wise at Pulsora.
Yeah, I think it's important to have that human oversight as well, isn't it? But I think it's really amazing how quickly AI is adapting and being able to collect all of this information, especially when we've covered topics like double materiality, for example. It's amazing what organisations can do with AI. But obviously, there are lots of different types of data. When we talk about comprehensive data, what does that actually mean in a sustainability or carbon context?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think when we think about a comprehensive greenhouse gas footprint for a company, there's a couple aspects into it. The first is, as you actually just brought up, materiality. So companies need to think about what parts of their business are most material to their footprint, meaning like, where do their emissions come from? Are most of their emissions related to, and a lot of this is industry specific, are a lot of their emissions related to their manufacturing and operations process? Or are a lot of the emissions related to, complex transmission and distribution in an electrical grid situation? Are they consuming a lot of electricity? Or is there a lot of transportation associated with their products downstream? Or maybe even, the actual use of their sold products is really high emissions, like for some energy company. So taking that kind of first step and thinking about, right, we call it the operational boundaries or the organizational boundaries. Where do you consider your emissions and where are the biggest sources of those emissions? That's the first step towards a comprehensive inventory, because you want to make sure that it's reflective of your business and your business's impact on global greenhouse gas emissions. The second thing is, and I think we mentioned this a little bit earlier as well, but just to expand upon it, this idea of you're not going to get all the primary data that you want. And so what do you do about gap filling? So one thing that's really important is to take a look at the data coming in. Let's take the example of utility bills. So you can look at, different fuel usage or electricity consumption, heating and cooling, waste and wastewater and all these things, and take a look at where different facilities are saying that they don't have those things. Maybe there's a particular location that just doesn't have cooling or doesn't consume any fuel. Making sure that those things are accurate and reflective of those facilities' operations versus just a gap in data that they don't have or didn't provide is really important for a comprehensive emissions inventory. And where you do find those gaps, like let's say, you have an electricity bill from middle of one month, middle of the next month, but then there's a few days because something happened, there's a few days, and then there's another bill, and there's a gap of a few days in the middle that we don't have any data for. We can use AI to actually identify representative, data and fill that gap with estimations. And that is something that makes the ultimate inventory comprehensive, because you are looking at the material sources of emissions, and wherever those material sources of emissions lie, you're filling any gaps so that you can fully trust the comprehensiveness and the quality of that data.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful to explain about that there will be gaps. This is real life. It's not going to be absolutely perfect, but I think providing you can provide justification and be very transparent about the methodology that's used, including estimations, then at least everything is all above board, and yeah, you can help to bridge some of those gaps. And in theory, the gaps should get smaller and smaller as the quality of data and the supply chain data improves.
Yeah.
So let's say we've got an organisation and they're literally just starting out on their journey. It could be seen as a bit of a minefield to them. Could you kind of walk through that typical evolution from manual spreadsheets, through to integrated data systems for an organisation and even their supply chains?
So for this example of a company starting out from spreadsheets into a platform, I want to use a company called Franklin Templeton. So this is a global asset manager. They're one of Pulsora's customers. And something that is really unique about their journey that I think others can relate to is so Franklin Templeton uses Workday. They use Workday for their HR data, and they also use it for their procurement data, their financial data. And what they didn't realize is that 95% of the information that they needed on the Pulsora platform actually already lived in Workday. So they already had spent all this effort making sure that that data in Workday was, really comprehensive, really high quality, these things that we're talking about. And so when they were first starting out, we said, well, look, you already have this great data set. Let's bring it into Pulsora. Let's take your, for example, finance data. Let's first do a baseline based on all of your spend information, and then we can get a very good baseline, a pretty robust baseline, even just from the first go at it, from this existing data set you already have. So that's one thing that I would say is, look at where you already are spending effort collecting this data. If your business is really energy intensive, you probably already have an energy management system that has a lot of this data that you can easily take as an input to a sustainability system like Pulsora and translate that into emissions. In Franklin Templeton's case, Workday's a partner of ours, so we already have this out-of-the-box integration with Workday, and we can bring that data in easily and get them started immediately. And then from the HR perspective, right, we're able to help support them with their ES&G reporting, So not just, we're talking a lot on this call about climate and GHG, and that's also my product area, but Pulsora also has this full, robust ESG reporting solution, which HR and social data is a really big piece of that. And so for this example, now Franklin Templeton is able to have really strong Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 GHG emissions on Pulsora. We're bringing in that data from Workday. We're applying the emissions factors automatically. And then we also have it complemented by all their social data. So they're able to, get started really quickly. So that's one example that I always like to share. I think another example of, walking through a company's journey, we also have another customer called Sisagem. So they are a manufacturer. They make glass. They're one of the top 5 global manufacturers in this space, very large, and they're based in Turkey. And essentially for Sisagem, they were using spreadsheets. Not as crazy as the monster situation. They honestly had a pretty good system, but now they wanted to be able to use this data, and they wanted to report against many different frameworks, right? We hear about these growing list of, they call it the alphabet soup. And, every year there's another framework that comes out and has another acronym we have to memorize. And honestly, a lot of the frameworks reuse the same set of data. And so for them, moving to Pulsora was an opportunity not only to quantify their emissions, right? We had their stationary combustion, their mobile, their process emissions, their fugitives, their scope 2, their, bringing this all together, but also leveraging this data in Pulsora to apply against all these different frameworks, the setting, using the same set of data and then being able to report it against all these different frameworks, because Pulsora's reporting module helps you do that. That is another, example of, and obviously it takes a little bit of time. It takes some time to go through this, and we partner with our customers, and it's a journey together. And there's an audit component as well, and assurance that they had to go through. But that effort, that kind of one time or like first year effort, then makes it, immeasurable for them to be able to just expand the level of stakeholder communications that they're able to do. So pretty cool. They had, over 450 metrics from 7 business units across 100 sites, all on Pulsora. So that kind of orchestration, and again, all with that data auditability and transparency and preparedness for audit and assurance, was really, really valuable for them to accomplish that. And they, even with their great spreadsheet system, they would really not be able to do it without a robust platform.
Yeah, I think it makes total sense, doesn't it? It's a no-brainer to be able to complete your calculations and reporting once, but then to be able to disclose it to many for whichever regulatory requirement there is, whether it's a mandatory requirement or for voluntary disclosures as well. So, I mean, talking about sustainability disclosures, we are seeing obviously that there is more and more regulation coming in, despite the omnibus and the hold on that earlier this year. We know that it's still coming down the line. So how can companies make their carbon data more auditable and traceable? Because I think you've mentioned about being audit ready a few times, and the importance of having auditable data, and obviously we're slightly biased because we need it to be auditable to be able to verify the accuracy of the data, but also transparency as well in terms of the methodology used. So
Yeah.
what advice would you give them in that particular area?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say for companies who have been quantifying their emissions, but not pursuing a formal audit until now with these different regulatory requirements, as you mentioned, Mel, I think that the first thing to do is to write out your approach. And by write out the approach, what I specifically mean is a few things. So one is what is material? So what scopes and categories of the GHG protocol are material to your business? How did you determine whether they were material, right? There's different ways you can do that. Is it, a percentage? based approach? Is it something that is based on some more, detailed data analysis, like in the new SBTI guidance? There's several different ways, but the most important thing is to document that. So first thing is, what scopes and categories? How did I decide? Second thing is emissions factors. We actually haven't talked a lot about emissions factors yet on this podcast, and they are, at the heart of any GHG quantification process, because as we talked about earlier, what we're essentially doing is we're taking all the business activities that a company has, and then we're translating them into emissions. And the link between those two things is the emission factor. And so documenting the emissions factors and the process of those and using them consistently is really, really critical to the audit. So, for example, you may want to think about specific emissions factors data sets and using them for different regions of your business. So maybe for the UK or the US, you're going to be using UK DEFRA-based factors or BEIS factors for the UK. And for the US, you have EPA and you have Greenie and EGRID and all of these, right? And then there's these other data sets that can be very useful for Europe, like AIB for market-based scope 2 emissions factors. Or, you have also global data sets like IEA. But really the most important thing is to document and to leverage these emissions factors consistently and to make sure that using the most location-specific factors possible and also the most industry-specific factors possible so that you can get as accurate as possible in that kind of like translation process, again, between your business activities and then your emissions. So something that Pulsora does is we promote this consistent usage of emission factors because we ask you up front to kind of set that up with us. We have defaults based on the locations of your facilities, but then we review them together and we say, okay, do you want to have consistency in all of your facilities across the world using the same data set for mobile combustion, for example? Or do you want to do something different? But anyways, the whole point, and emissions factors gets really detailed really quickly, the whole point is just writing this down and using the same data sets year over year if possible. And then I would say...
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say that it comes back to data integrity as well, doesn't it? Which is integrity is one of the core principles of ISO 14064, and it's just really interesting to hear how you're kind of weaving in the auditability and traceability of the data, which just gives that added confidence, doesn't it, to key stakeholders about the quality and integrity of the data. And I was just kind of going to ask about how you think that technology and specifically AI can help with that. If, for example, your investor, or if you're going seeking investment, if an investor would ask you for that information, or auditors for that matter.
Yeah. So there's a feature that I'm really excited about that we have recently released for Pulsora that is a invoice reading feature. So essentially what this feature does is it uses AI. This is what we used to call OCR, right? But OCR was very kind of brittle in terms of the format of a document and like the language used. Now with AI, we can read a bill, for example, like an electricity bill or fuel bill, no matter what language, no matter what format the utility put it in, and we can extract data like what was the start and end date of this period? How much did you spend? How much did you consume? In what units? And so this is something that we have available on Pulsora now, which is essentially users can upload, the invoice, the file, not have to enter the data in Pulsora or any other system, and then the data is extracted automatically from that bill. So this is a huge time-saving effort that also means it is extremely traceable and auditable because you already have your evidence document alongside your data. And then the other cool thing is, let's say now you've brought all your data together, you have your bills, you have your different spend, and you have your different consumption and your activities, you have your emissions, and now you're going to prepare for your audit process. Again, using that same kind of invoice or evidence file that may be attached. Because by the way, on Pulsora, every single activity, you can attach one or more evidence files. We can take those files and we can use AI to compare the file content with activity data content. And then we can again like identify anomalies. We can say, hey, well, this file says, you spent whatever, $10,000 on this CapEx expenditure, but what you entered was actually 5,000. Like, why is it different? And so those kinds of things, those kinds of AI use cases just help with preparing for that audit and that sign off. And to your question, I think getting a formal audit from someone like Carbonology, is a big piece of that stamp of approval that you can go and use for raising capital or sharing it with other stakeholders as well.
Yeah, sure. And I think just as an end note, because obviously it's great if we've got invoices, and the fact that you can interrogate that data and identify any anomalies is amazing. But sometimes you have suppliers and you can't for love nor money get any information from them. And
Yeah.
obviously, it'd be remiss of me not to mention about the challenges that the businesses face with getting data and information from their supply chain to cover their Scope 3 emissions. So, are there any hints and tips that you can provide in relation to this if a supplier won't or can't share detailed information?
Yeah. So I would say the first thing is, honestly, don't worry about getting primary information from all of your suppliers. It's probably not worth your time or their time, because all of this emissions gathering and all of this quantification is really in pursuit of your strategy on sustainability. It's not just a means to getting this number, right? So once you have enough data to identify your decarbonization plans and strategy, to share with stakeholders with a high degree of confidence, you don't necessarily need, to get to 100% perfect data, right? So the first thing and I think the thing that I like to talk about with customers who are starting to figure out that supplier prioritization effort is you think about like a few different dimensions. One, you think about how much money do you spend with this supplier? You think about how long have I had a relationship with this supplier? And you also think about what is the impact of the supplier on my emissions? And for any suppliers that meet those criteria, those are the ones you go after, because those are the ones that are going to be the most impactful, the most material primary data that you want to get. But to your point, maybe some of them don't, respond, some of them don't engage. There's some other things that you can do. So first of all, we always have, spend-based emissions factors to get a baseline. We always have, and by the way, these factors can be quite specific to a particular industry, can also be quite specific to a particular region. So you can get pretty close, even with limited data and limited primary data from a supplier. The other thing that you can do is you can, this is the part where now we can get creative, right? You can find similar suppliers and kind of create a emission factor that may be relevant to your supplier. You may be able to have an industry group meeting and talk about how you want to improve data transparency and data sharing. We see a lot of this in different industries that may not be vertically integrated, because together by sharing this data and improving the emissions, decreasing the emissions and improving the sustainability aspect of your products, then you can potentially charge more money as an industry. You can, consumers will have more confidence in your product. There's all kinds of benefits. You have long-term sustainability in the true term of what sustainability means, right? And so there's a lot of different things that you can do, but the most important thing, to be honest, is I would say make a strategy, make a plan for your supplier sustainability engagement, and don't sweat it if not everyone gives you the data that you want.
That's great advice, Jessica. And I think there are lots of hints and tips in there as well, which I think is going to be really reassuring for those organisations that are struggling with their Scope 3 emissions. So I think that's really helpful, because I think sometimes it's almost like the third door method, isn't it? So you knock on the first door and it's closed. You knock on the second door and it's closed. if you go around to the back door, but then if you try and find a third door or a fourth, and I think you've provided about 5 or 6 there. So that's been really helpful. I think it was Richard Branson that first mentioned about the third door strategy. So yeah, it's about basically not taking no for an answer, but looking at alternative ways that actually may get you better results in the end. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing those insights with me today, Jessica. Now, before we say goodbye, I've just got a couple of quick questions that I like to ask at the end of these interviews sometimes. And the first one is if you could gift a book to someone, what would it be and why?
Yeah, I think, okay, here's one that's top of mind for me. I would gift someone a Costa Rica travel book. Any of them will do. But I think, Costa Rica, for anyone listening, who hasn't been, it's a fabulous country, amazing people, amazing food, and also highly immersive in nature, and mostly runs on renewable energy. So very cool country. Highly recommend, visiting or getting inspired by their way of life. And you can't go wrong with learning about the place. And it's kind of top of mind for me because I'm going in a few months. So I'm also reading.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I was there in end of January this year, actually. But yeah, I only got to go to the capital. I didn't really get much of a chance to explore, unfortunately. But yeah, well, we can have a chat about that offline anyway. But yeah, no, great recommendation. I hope you have a good trip. Yeah, just finally, what's your favourite quote that you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
Yeah. So the quote that I chose to leave folks with is by Rupi Kaur, and it's, "If you were born with the weakness to fall, you were born with the strength to rise." And it's from her book of poetry called Milk and Honey, which is fabulous if you haven't read it. But it's inspirational. We're always, and especially in the software and in the greenhouse gas and sustainability world, right? We always have to have lots of optimism towards the future, and it's okay if we make some mistakes along the way. So progress is the most important piece.
I love that quote, Jessica. I haven't heard of it before, but I made a note. So Milk and Honey, and I'll we'll include a link to that quote in the show notes as well. Well, I'd just like to say it's been an absolute pleasure and joy having you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and hints and tips so freely with us today, Jessica, and some real life examples as well. I love the one of the monster. I think a lot of businesses can relate to that in some shape or form. So yeah, it's been great. And actually, one of the things that you mentioned about with the Pulsora platform, obviously it is an ESG platform. We've just been having a conversation today around, carbon ultimately. So I'd love to get you back onto the podcast so you can talk a little bit more about the kind of the social and the governance aspect. Although we have touched on governance, I guess, in some respects in relation to the audit and compliance part of it. But nevertheless, I think a lot of organisations struggle with the social part as well in terms of being able to demonstrate evidence of compliance in that area. So yeah, we need to hook up another day to get you back onto the podcast as our guest. So yeah, thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
You're welcome. And what we'll do is we'll include links to Pulsora and maybe your LinkedIn contact details on there as well, if anybody would like to reach out to you as well, Jessica, if that's okay.
Sure.
Great. Okay, thank you very much for listening, everybody, and I look forward to catching up with you on the next episode of the ISO Show.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.